Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm fizzing with excitement to welcome Challenger brand royalty onto this podcast. Camilla Barnard is co-founder of Rude Health. I think Rude Health were doing kind of Challenger brands way before the word actually kind of existed. They've won listings at Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Whole Food Market, Planet Organic, have a huge export business. I think, if I'm right in saying, Camilla, you've got over 60 SKUs. I absolutely love your approach to MPD. And back in 2015, they really kind of catapulted the kind of dairy oat milk, revolution in many respects. Rude Health, a brand we've looked up to massively at Money Life. I kind of love your fun and playful, engaging personality as a brand. So yeah, I'm super, super grateful for you coming on today, Camilla. Thanks so much.
That's quite an intro. Thanks, Dan.
That's all right. Wow. I was rehearsing it in the mirror beforehand.
God, I don't know if I can live up to all that.
No. It's like genuinely, obviously. So Louise, who I've mentioned numerous times on this podcast, she was obviously sales director at Rude Health. She then came and joined us at Money Life, and she's been such a great mentor to me and has kind of really, I think we've taken a lot from Rude Health as a brand and implemented it at Money Life. And I think that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation.
That's lovely to hear, because I'm a big Manny fan. We've actually got 3 tubs in the house at the moment.
Amazing. Have you tried the new rich cocoa yet?
Oh yes.
Oh, happy days.
Oh,
thoughts?
Yes. Amazing. I'm a plain. I mean, it's brilliant. And the flavors, as usual, spot on. And the texture's fantastic. I'm still plain crunchy every time.
Keep it simple. Yeah.
Simple.
Amazing. So I was doing a lot of research for this interview, and where I want to actually start is quite many continents away from London, granola, dairy oat milks, and Rude Health. It's actually like the kind of wildly irreverent country, Japan. In doing research, I found out that you did Japanese at university, you worked in fashion, I think recruitment and finance, and you actually lived in Japan. I would love to use Japan as a kind of a lens to explore your childhood. So I suppose, where did you kind of grow up, and where did this fascination with Japan, say, versus other cultures, begin to kind of bubble in your mind? I find it quite an interesting place to start.
Yeah, no, that is different. I grew up in Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire, and I think it was a combination of things. Dad travelled for work and would always bring us back these little souvenirs and also stories, and I was fascinated. It was different. I've always liked different, new, interesting. And then when I was quite young, probably 6 or 7, a Japanese family moved into town. And that was quite a thing, because at the time, it was about as homogenous as you can get. So having a Japanese family there was completely different. No, there was no one Japanese. And they'd come straight from Tokyo, didn't speak much English. And their sons were about the same age as my brothers. And they were just the loveliest people, and it sort of sparked an interest. The mother was incredibly kind and generous, also hilariously funny. It took her absolutely years to learn to drive, and it was kind of an ongoing joke that she kept saying, I'm kamikaze driver, completely taking the mickey out of herself. But she also that she would invite. One time she invited I think me and a friend round, and she dressed us up in kimonos and gave us Japanese tea, and it was just, this was the 1970s. So now I feel like everybody knows, through so much more media and so much more travel, actually everybody knows a lot more about what goes on in other countries. But honestly, at the time, abroad was really quite abroad, especially if you were 6 or 7. So even France was quite exotic, and Japan was just another planet. And it absolutely just sparked an interest. And I think that interest just sort of stayed, didn't go. And then in 6th form, while I was doing precisely 0 work at school, I was doing evening classes in Japanese. And then I took a year between school and university, which I somehow managed to get into. and spent that in Japan as an au pair and teaching and stuff, which was incredible. Then I did, as you say, I did the Japanese at university. So it just sort of stuck as an interest. I like the language, I love the culture, was fascinating. And there are parallels with British culture, and it's also an island nation. I'd say in every way, it's probably more extreme than British culture. You know, if we're sort of slightly restrained and stiff upper lippy, you know, traditionally, you know, Japan has been historically more insular, more cut off, and I think that makes it even more. I mean, even more. What's the word? There is a word for everything in Japan. A specific word for a specific occasion. So if you arrive home, there's a word you say as you arrive home, which is tadaima. If you're at home and somebody comes home, there's a word that you say to that person, okari. Okay, nasai. And if you leave the house, there's a word for that. If you're the person who's in the house being left, there's a word for that. If you go into someone else's house, there's a word for that. I mean, it's like, it's so specific, and there is a right thing to say and a right thing to do in every single situation. And as a foreigner, you will never know them all. It's like, you're always going to be wrong. You are permanently going to be making mistakes. And the longer you stay there, it's not that you get better at it, it's just you gradually begin to realize how many more mistakes there are you could make, kind of thing, and how bad you are at being Japanese. Absolutely fascinating.
No, I love that. There's so much to explore on that, because I actually went to Japan for the World Cup in 2019, and I was just blown away. As you said, it's like a different planet. I was like, this is mental. Like, I love the food's fantastic. Just the food to me was just like literally pulled my soul. I was like, okay, I'm in love with this place. Whereabouts in Japan were you living?
Well, the first time I went as an au pair, I was in Yokosuka, which is, if you go from Tokyo down to Yokohama and over to Yokosuka, so it's it's an easy train ride into Tokyo. And then when I went there as a student and then went back after, it was in Fukuoka, which is on Kyushu, which is the southern island. So yeah, and obviously did a lot of traveling, including hitchhiking, which is not a thing in Japan.
Really?
No, it's not.
But
it works quite well. They don't. I mean, actually, you know, if you know anything about Japanese culture, it's like, of course it's not a thing. But as students, you're like, but that's all we can afford to do, so we're going to do it.
yeah, amazing. And back to the words piece, when you're saying they've got words, there's quite specific questions. But what is kind of a word? What's your sort of favorite word in Japanese that isn't? Because I find learning from cultures so fascinating. Is there like a specific word that's like, means something to you in Japanese?
Oh, there's a couple actually. There's one which I think a lot of people we haven't got one for it. Natsukashi, which is a sort of, that takes me back, or oh wow, that's a reminder, or there isn't anything for it, but you might have a flavor that you haven't had for years. You go, oh my god, you know, natsukashi, and everyone knows exactly what you mean, but there isn't anything for it here. And I do love also, I mean, of course there's words for it, you know, at the beginning of a meal you say itadakimasu, and at the end of the meal you say gochisousama deshita every time, and it's just a lovely framing of the meal. You know, it's like a recognition that you've been served something, you're about to eat it, you know, and then thank you very much, which we just, I mean, England, I think English, or England, the UK, is one of the only places that doesn't have, at the very least, a starting a meal phrase. It's very odd. I've never been anywhere else where there isn't something you say at the beginning of a meal.
And I suppose those little things make you more present in many respects. I'm going to butcher the Japanese, so apologies up front, but the word about sort of reminiscing is such a delicious thing to do. It's like, it really does make you feel super present and content. And I think we've lacked that so much in our culture, because it's just constant, like Instagram, like the next thing, there's no pause. And what I learned when I went to Japan, I was like, there's these little moments in the day that add up and compound, and you have like, okay, so it's saying this before the meal. It does, I don't know how to, there's probably a Japanese word for it, but like there's almost a calming effect. And then I suppose because when I was in Japan, and this is something not like, I haven't gone and specifically done this at Money Life, but what I noticed from Japan, it was always the little things. So it was the attention on the little things. And I suppose at Money Life, we've tried to implement that massively. So it's like you know, the way you write to a buyer, the handwritten note, like like even our t-shirts, like making sure they're like the best quality, and it's just, so it's like these little things that compound. What would you say are some of the key like things you've implemented from Japan potentially at Rude Health or life actually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, definitely. I mean, we do have at least a phrase for it over here, devil is in the detail. And I 100% believe that. We've, especially as a small business, totally like you, everything was, you know, I remember lying in bed and thinking, have I chosen the right Pantone? You know, should I have gone for 345 or 346? You know, is that just slightly too bright, that green? You know, and lit hours on something that probably most people will never notice. I think that was me, but I think actually my interest in that sort of thing may have been why I enjoyed Japan, was rather than, you know, it just compounded it, that everything is detailed, everything is specific. There is a reason for everything. Actually, I am always, will always, have always am a why person. So I'm more or less incapable of following an instruction until I understand the reason for it. I don't really want to be rebellious, but if I am given instructions that I consider not very helpful, or the reason for them isn't very good, it's like I'm constitutionally incapable of doing them because it doesn't make any sense. Why would I waste my energy doing something which doesn't make any sense? So everything is sort of thought through. There's got to be a reason for everything. I've got to understand why everything has got to make sense. So there's not, I mean, which makes for very efficient, I think, in some ways, action, because I'm not just going to splattergun kind of go out there. I can't remember why I started on this now. But it was like, I suppose it was when we came to ingredients and stuff, we'd be like, well, why do you have to use that sugar? We don't want that sugar. Why do you have to do that? You know, we want something else. So why does it have to be like this? Why do we have to advertise? You know, why do you everything was a question. It was like, well, you know, yes, that may be what's given, that may be what's always done, but why? Is there a good reason for it, or is it just habit? Is that just because what everyone else is doing? Is it possible that there is actually not a very good reason for it, or it doesn't apply to, you know, a small business or something like that? Actually, and it's odd. So that was me. I think I was a why person, and that sort of got taken into the business, which actually doesn't go down very well in Japan at all. And I think maybe it was Japan that helped me realize that that was kind of who I was, because you don't ask why in Japan. You very much do not ask why ever. You just do what you're told. And it made me realize I would have been a disastrous Japanese person. I would have had an awful school career in Japan. And probably, I don't know, I might have ended up dropping out or something, because I just don't know if I could have followed all those rules. I mean, there's nothing but rules. You either got to suck it up and get used to just living within the rules and find your kind of space around them, or I think you combust and, I don't know, you just drop out of society. I mean, there is quite an interesting counterculture out there, and it's quite extreme, because it's like the rules society is quite extreme, and then the counterculture is quite extreme, I think. So it's fascinating. I don't know whether what I've taken into business, perhaps more of an awareness of self. There's nothing like living abroad to understand who you are, because it shows, you know, it shows you up in a way you don't see it when you're amongst your own. You know, it's like taking a fish out of water, you can suddenly see the water. That's the wrong analogy, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
no, for sure. That's fascinating, because I think it's so interesting with their, especially from a sort of food angle, like their food just seems so creative, and again, from outside looking in, all the sushi, the wagyu, the ramen, all of it, but there is, but beneath this kind of very militant process and rule book to things, but I think for people listening to this, there's a massive balance between always having that curiosity and always asking why. It's something we've tried to do at Money Life, like, why do we have to do it that way? Why can we do it this way? Versus having some sort of, you know, not rule book, but template to follow. And I think you can't be in two camps. If you're just constantly why, you're just never going to get anything like done. Do you know what I mean? You're like, okay, why that color? You'll never get it done. So it's trying to find that balance between having sort of a template of what's been there, balanced with always asking why. And I think the best brands, or anyone listening to this, if they can balance those two sort of things simultaneously, there's a real sweet spot of creativity. And there's an amazing example of that, which we'll discuss later, is the Rude Health Cafe, because I think that's just unreal. Like, I think it's absolutely amazing. But I was listening to a podcast, and you said that two of the things you guys had, yourself and Nick, was blind faith and absolute drive. I'd love to sort of go back to you know, you said your dad would travel a lot. Like, how did your parents shape, give you this kind of tenacity and drive? Was there any specific moments how do they embody that within you?
Do you know what that was? I think Nick, I will have described Nick, my husband and co-founder, as having the blind faith and drive. That's what he, and that was crucial during the recession. We wouldn't have got through it. Absolutely wouldn't have got through it. That is not so much what I bring. I think I mean, which is why we were quite good teamwork. I brought a very different energy to the business. But I think what I learned from growing up was I really don't want to spend my life in a job that I don't enjoy. I was like, that's really where I don't want to go. It's not a good place to be. And yeah, I think that just stuck deep down. And then there was something in me that always wanted to do my own thing. I mean, really quite early on, for no particular reason. I remember for some reason they asked us at school, what do you want to do when you grow up? I mean, this must be when I was 12 or 13 or something. I can't remember why it came up. And I said I wanted my own business. And I had no idea why I wanted my own business. I didn't know what it meant. Didn't really know anyone with their own business, but that it was just there. That was a thing. I think it was being able to do my own thing, actually, and probably because as a why person, I'm wanting to make my own rules. That's the easiest way to do that, is not have a boss.
Yeah, no, I love that. Amazing. And so then where I want to go now is to the genesis of Rude Health.
Yeah.
So what were you yourself and Nick doing kind of the 6 months preceding Rude Health, and how did the idea begin to bubble?
Well, I was looking after a 1-year-old and pregnant with the second child in the 6 months leading up to Rude Health. So I had my hands full, and it was actually the only time in my life when I wasn't working in that, more or less, that 6 months in the build-up. And Nick was doing a variety of things at that point. I think he was still publishing. He was basically B&Q's publisher at that stage. And he was also still flying, and I can't think what else, but yeah, we were in a baby phase. Totally.
Baby phase. And with the name Rude Health, to me, it's just, I love it. And actually, you know, it's almost like a juxtaposition of rude and health. It yes. is this funness. And I interviewed, funnily enough, you talked about Devil in the Detail. I interviewed Luke from Lucky Saint.
Yeah.
And one of their values is Devil in the Detail as well. But I was asking him, like, the name Lucky Saint again is a juxtaposition. And he said he went around the houses trying to pick the name. And I think the name is so important for brands. And look, to be honest, we not overlooked it, but for a long time people were like, mate, what does Manny Life mean? Like, we had someone from Starbucks at Speciality thinking it was like Viagra, Manny Life, and I was just like, oh my god, this is a very awkward conversation, went extremely sweaty red. But I think getting the name right is really important. So maybe you've never been asked this before, but were there any other names that got bandied around yours and Nick's kitchen table that weren't Rude Health?
I now can't remember what any of them were. We had a specific sort of brainstorm session, and the idea was we'd get everything down on paper and then vote. But as soon as someone said Rude Health, and nobody could remember who it was, as soon as somebody said Rude Health, we went, oh my God, that's perfect. It does everything we want. Because as you said, it's actually, I mean, as you may know, may or may not know, it's an Old English expression to be in rude health, which is like, to be in rude health, it's got that sense of energy and, you know, like really, really well, super healthy. And I think it's rude from the Old English ruddy, red. So it's like that red cheeked kind of healthy, you know, like outside, you know, glow. So it's exactly, so that the actual phrase being in rude health was exactly how we want people to feel. And, you know, that food should be a part of how you feel. But even if you don't know the phrase, and luckily it doesn't matter, because most people don't. As you said, the contrast with Rude and Health, particularly at the time, because back in 2006, when we started Rude Health with our ultimate muesli, health was a very serious world. So having Rude Health was immediately not what you were expecting, which was lovely because it just catches the eye, bang home the health, but you get something else that's not in the same world, semantically.
Yeah, no, because I remember that it was quite a kind of crusty senile category in some respects, and then I think you guys came marching in a bit like Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, whatever. It was just this eye-gorgingly gorgeous products on shelf that just it was palpable the way it kind of made you feel as you go around the supermarket. And I think that's what everyone listening to this is trying to do, is make someone feel something. And I listened to a podcast and you said a brand is a personality, and I thought, bingo, that is genius. Could you talk about that a bit more? Because I think it's really,
that whole bit you've just said actually was really interesting, because that whole thing about feel is more what I bring to the business.
Right.
The whole brand bit is my bit, and yeah, that was the whole point. And it was very funny. We were talking about something. My kid said something the other day, and it just made me think that is killer marketing. And they were talking about fizzy drinks, and my son said, "Yeah, no, Pepsi is so much nicer. So Pepsi is really, really nice." He went, "But I'll always buy Coke." And I was just like, wow, how brilliant is that Coke has managed to maintain that desire and that brand love with the 100% knowledge that you actually prefer the taste of the competitor. I mean, that is the biggest win ever. It's insane, makes no sense at all, but it shows, if you can create, so that is nothing to do with creating the best product at all. He can sit there and say, I prefer Pepsi and I choose Coke. And to me, that shows you can create the best product in the world. And that's not it. That's not enough. You probably do need to create the best product in the world in order to sort of get your foot in the door, but you also, that won't do it. And the history is littered with the whole, everyone listening to this is probably far too young, but Betamax, VHS, when video recorders came in, they were a thing. The better one got trumped. It happens time and time again. And for me, it's the difference is almost always about how you feel about something. And it's intangible, and I think it's quite difficult to create. It took us years and years. You talk about the bright colors. We took us 7 years to get to that point. We started in 2006 with one muesli, and then there was a long period of which we can talk about if you want to. And then in 2013, for again, Serendipity, our pack designer, who was freelance, got a full-time job and couldn't work for us anymore. And I didn't want to go to a new pack designer and say, can you redesign the packs but make them a bit better? Because that would be literally the worst brief ever. So we went through a process, and so we managed to get a deal, because we still didn't have any money at this point. We managed to get a deal through our copywriter, whose agency had a request from the BBC to feature them, and none of the big brands wanted that. So we were like, well, we'll have it. We can feature it. There's nothing you can't overhear. So we got a cheap deal to do a what is it called? An extreme consumer co-creation workshop, which really was testing with various different consumers, testing how far can the brand go, what do people think of it, what is the essence of, fundamentally to come out with what is the essence of Rude Health, how has it moved, and to be able to turn that into a creative brief. So we started with this workshop, and then we kept on working on it, and then again, this is where the why thing came up. It was fine what we did in the workshop, but I was like, it's not specific enough. It's not tight enough. We need to do another round. We need to do more. We need to really get there, because we've got to nail this. It's halfway there. We've got to nail it. So eventually we did 3 rounds to come out with what, after 7 years, was a lot bolder. We were a lot more confident. We really knew what we wanted to do, and we realized that what we had been doing was trying to let the food speak for itself, which was exactly what isn't going to work. and we realized what we needed to do was to be out there being what we wanted the food to do. So, you know, this idea of, if you want people to feel in rude health, and all your food is created for that sense, either for people who feel like it, who want to feel like it, then that's what you've got to show. You've got to show the sense of being in rude health. So the packs have to be in rude health. And as a small brand, our packs were our advertising. Basically, that was it. There was no other advertising. So if the packs are spot on, then you're they're speaking for themselves on the shelves. So that was the point at which we went from, actually quite recessive, quite typically healthy looking, really the food credential packs, which are quite brown, quite plain, quite lost on the shelf, to what you see now. Although, I say, I have to give massive credit to the designers, because apparently the one thing that we'd said when we briefed them, Nick and I, the only thing we'd said, he said, any restrictions, and apparently we said we have to keep the brown. I mean, and neither of us has any memory of saying this at all. And quite correctly, he completely ignored us. And when they came back with the designs, the one we chose was the one with the most colour in, 0 brown, absolutely 0 brown.
That's amazing. No, because I think I found a picture of the old branding, and anyone listening to this, you should Google it, because it's not like a brand, it's a complete rebrand and rechange.
Yeah.
So there's so much in that, Camilla. I think what you're saying, trying to get to the essence of rude health, getting more specific, how to get a brand to speak or make people feel on shelf. Lots of people listening to this will be trying to do this. They'll have like a great product, but they're trying to get the brand bit right.
Yeah.
What would you say are the kind of the pillars or the principles, the 1 to 3 principles that are needed to build a great brand? Because I think anyone listening to this could go away and potentially, they may not have access to a rude health masterclass, but it may really help them just to get their brand DNA across on shelf or on pack or on social, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a classical marketing training, so there's probably a sort of actual answer to that question, but from which is probably well worth knowing.
But I think it's interesting hearing yours. That's why I actually prefer not hearing the template, as we were saying earlier. I much prefer actually hearing it from people who've been there and done it themselves.
It was a combination for me. So where it came from was okay, so it came from what was it we were trying to do. So it came from what do we believe, and that was, I love food. Food is my happy place. I just, eating, cooking, sharing food with people, the whole, and you have to eat. You've got to sleep, got to eat, and you've got to drink. There is pretty much nothing else in life that you have to do. It's fundamental. So for me, and it was quite a shock when I left home to find out that quite a lot of people, food was not their happy place in any shape or form. And that was quite a shock. And I really felt like, wow, that's a fundamental that's not right. And that's not great. And part of the dislocation or dissonance, part of the problem seemed to be, for a lot of people, there was a sense that if it's delicious, then I shouldn't be eating it. And everything I should be eating is going to be miserable. It's going to be healthy and horrible. But actually what I want to eat is that stuff out there, which is really bad for me. And there seemed, for a lot of people, I'm being an extreme case, but there was a real sense that you weren't going to enjoy the food that you ought to be eating. And I'd just grown up with home cooked food, and you could eat anything. And then we had sweets and treats as well. But, fundamentally we were full on decent food. And then the rest was a top up. So nothing was off the table. Nothing was banned. And nothing was ever, obviously sweets and treats were like, well, I'm not going to make that my main meal because it's not really going to nourish me, but I can have them. So it was a very easy relationship. And I suppose really what we wanted to do was to make healthy food desirable. There is no reason that something that's nourishing can't also be satisfying. And that was what we wanted to achieve, was for people to feel like that, to feel as excited about their whether it's a muesli or a granola or an almond milk, or an oat cake. It was that you can combine nourishment and satisfaction, deliciousness, and And part of that comes in what it looks like. But that was what, so it was really, that was the sort of essence, that was why we started. And I think that's your, you know, it's a why. If you can identify your, why did you start? What did you want to do? You know, yes, you wanted to make an amazing popcorn or something, but why did you want to make the amazing popcorn, or, you know, the amazing peanut butter, whatever it is? What made you want to do that? What were you trying to fix? Or what was missing? And I think if you can get to that, that's really important. So yeah, for us, it was the making healthy, delicious and desirable was a huge part of it. And as time went on, it sort of slightly developed. But if you know that, that leads on to then, well, what would that look like? You know, how would that, you can begin, and where are the issues and where can you play with that understanding? And so it came from what were we trying to do ultimately, what was our goal, and then you've got a whole load of things to, what's your competitor set, you know, and what are the important things for you to do? For us, it was packaging, it was visual, because the really obvious thing about health food was it had a really strong look and feel. It was brown and green, and it sat in the health food shops. So we realized quite early on that sitting in the health food shops wasn't going to rock it, because it turned out, because that was where our heart was. We're like, we shop in farmers markets and health food stores. And about 18 months in, actually maybe even less, it may have been only a year in, I think we had a few mueslis and some porridges at the time. Someone said, you do realize that 94% of cereals are sold in the supermarket? And we went, no, interesting fact. Right, in that case, right, okay. And then, you know, that's your decision moment where you go, well, are we trying to be a niche artisan brand, or do we actually want this to be available for everybody? And I mean, we were pretty clear immediately, we want this to be available. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to change anyone's relationship with food if we're only looking at 6% of the market. So yeah, we realized then that supermarkets had to be part of our landscape.
You've segued perfectly there, Camilla, to my next question. Absolute genius. I love it. So, because that's what I was going to ask, actually, is again another pain point for listeners. And you know, it does pain me seeing brands go into a supermarket shelf. They've put their kind of their heart, soul, blood, sweat, tears, years into getting it on the shelf, and then they just get kicked out. It's like a revolving hotel door, and it's so sad. And I think, I kind of want to talk about how you guys drove the rate of sale on this, because was Waitrose your first malt listing? Was that
Sainsbury's, but Waitrose was the first sort of big one in a sense,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you drive the rate of sale when you were on a shoestring budget?
That is a really good question. I'd say not very well, honestly. I think it wasn't something we were terribly good at, which might explain why and also, I think, to your point, absolutely, it's really hard, and you can get kicked out. And I think the story that we were always told was, you know, once you've been kicked out, you'll never get back in. And just to reassure everyone, I can tell you that's not the case. It does not have to be the case. I think we've been kicked out of Tesco's 4 times.
That is so reassuring for listeners. Honestly, that is
we're back in. We're in. So you know, it was there were a number of reasons. It was a different reason every time. But how did we do rate of sale? Well, Sainsbury's was our first malts listing, and we were in the free from aisle, and that you were a little bit more protected in that area, because it was such a what's the word I want? It's a very fixed demand. The people who shop there were shopping there, and you didn't have to do a huge amount. Once they discovered you, then they would go back and buy you again and again, because there wasn't an enormous amount of choice. And if you presented them with something which tasted nice and looked good, you know, bingo, it was a pretty good, it was inelastic demand. That was what I was looking for, very inelastic demand curve in the free from section. So Sainsbury's was actually a fantastic listing, because that pretty much, our puffed rice pretty much got us through 2008, which was the recession kickoff, because it stayed in and kept going. And at that point, that year, we had been expecting bigger listings from Sainsbury's, more new listings from Tesco's, and listings from Waitrose. Of course, by the time Lehman's went down, and then all the supermarkets were more or less clearing their premium ranges, and that was the moment when they created Tesco Value and Waitrose Essentials and whatever the Sainsbury's one is. So absolutely the last thing they wanted was a new super premium cereal brand. So the only listing that came through in 2008 was Waitrose, and that was it kept us going and stuck. And I mean, we did everything we could. I mean, what I wanted to do was cut through. So we didn't have any money, couldn't advertise.
Sorry to interrupt, just a quick question. Were you in the old branding at this point, or were you in the new branding?
Old branding. This was 2008. Okay. The new branding didn't happen until 2013. So we weren't loud and proud on shelf. Dorset had done their rebrand by this time. So they were looking actually amazing. They transformed the muesli category completely. And it was really hard. So I mean, we were trying, what I wanted to do, and I don't know, we weren't actually terribly good at it. What I wanted to do was something which was different. So when there was, for example, a BBC Good Food Show exhibition, which was one of the bigger and better exhibitions at the time, we had a teeny weeny stand, and I think one year we didn't even have a stand. They were huge. We just get a lot. Nobody wants to try muesli at a food show. You know, if you're selling chocolate or alcohol, you are in a good position. But if you're or even peanut butter, actually, peanut butter would work well. But muesli is just not what people are going for. So I knew that we were never going to get much through that. So what we were trying to do was do sampling outside at the train station. So you could get, and this was in London to the right demographic who were roughly shopping at Tesco. So we would either do sort of just straightforward sampling, where you're just handing out mini packs, to everyone who turns up, and hopefully that reaches more people. And also that gets the food in people's mouths. So that was my sort of big belief, was if our whole thing was about healthy food can be delicious, then the proof is in the pudding. Get as many people as possible to taste it, basically. So sampling was a huge sort of thing for us, was get people to taste it. And we tried doing a sort of stunty thing where we had, I was hugely inspired by a story that Howie's did when they couldn't, which is a clothing brand, that when they couldn't afford a stand or were too late to enter for London Fashion Week or, some clothes fair. So they couldn't do that. But what they did was they painted up some models with their T-shirts, and then sent them in, and then once they were in, they took off their clothes and walked around with the painted tops. They got thrown out, but that was perfect because then it got written up in all of the magazines, and you're like, oh, bingo, that's free advertising, amazing. And so that was the sort of thing that inspired me. And I honestly have never come up with one that good. And we tried to do a sort of like a naked sampling thing. It didn't really work. We didn't do it well enough. There's some really good ones. The other one that I loved, one of my favorite marketing campaigns ever, it's probably relevant to nothing, but I just love it, was I think it was done in America first, but then I think a Welsh milk company did it here, Calon Wen, when they put lonely hearts on the side of the milk pack. It was genuine. It was farmers, which is, can be a fairly lonely life. And they did lonely hearts on the side of the milk carton. And I think actually managed to find some of them wives, partners, husbands. So it was, and I thought that was an amazing campaign because again, it was true. It was like, this life is quite intense and you don't get a chance to meet many people. Put that on your carton and use that as your marketing campaign, I just thought was absolutely brilliant. So anyway, it was about fundamentally it was about taste, and the only other thing it was about was PR, and then the packs. That was what we had. And did we do a great job of driving sales? We did as best as we could, but with no money, it's relatively difficult.
I think that's so reassuring for listeners, and I also think what you've said there, Camilla, of like, if you start with asking why all the time. So if someone gets listed tomorrow in Waitrose, if you start asking why, you'll think of creative ways to get people trying the product. I think the sampling piece is really important, and I think it's also really important that you're doing it yourself, because no one will care about your brand as much as you. I know you can outsource it to these agencies, but they're probably like sat there limply on their phone. Like, it just creates the worst first impression. Not sorry to be a bit rude, but like, it creates a worse first impression for your brands. But if you think, I can imagine Lou giving out samples, or with us at Manlife, we're so bloody passionate about it that it has that palpable effect on the consumer. And then if you can ask those whys in a creative way and do something a bit irreverent, you may get some PR off the back of it. So I think that's it. It's like, ask why, sample yourself in a creative way with the goal to hopefully get some wangle, some PR off the back of it. Because I think PRs, I'm fascinated by that. I think I've got a mate who dressed up as it's a brand called I think it's T-Rex. They all dressed up as loads of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Got into Sainsbury's, got loads of PR off it, and probably cost them what the cost of some dinosaur suits in a bit of time. Exactly. Like,
when you can do it, when it works, it's amazing. You just can't. It's just not under your control. You can't guarantee it works, so it's a total risk. But if it works, it works.
Completely. And one, I suppose that's actually another thing I listened to a podcast is what you said, serendipity over strategy. And I was like, oh my God, that is just ticking my boxes, because I believe that it's what you were saying about the why. Like I think when you're in the super nascent stages, you can sit around and like pontificate with this big plan, but it's never going to go the way you think it's going to go. So having this ability to be serendipitous and try new things, and I think your approach, and this is what I've heard from Lou, to MPD is amazing. Like, you just try something and it's fun, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like, as the team has scaled, so I don't know, is the team over 50 now?
Not yet, no. Including the cafe and the little office in the Netherlands, I think we're at 44.
44. So still a pretty big team from the early days.
Yeah.
So now as you're bigger and there is more kind of not a name process, but there's more process in place, because it has to be as you're a bigger business. How do yourself and Nick still inspire, from like a leadership perspective, this sort of naivety and serendipity to make sure you're always being creative?
That is a really interesting question, because that is something which we're working on, how you maintain that forever. And what we now have a CEO who actually knows what they're doing, and actually knows how to run a business. Because obviously what Nick and I did was start a business and build a business. And it's now at a different stage, and neither of us knows how you run a business. And actually, neither of us really wants to. It's not what we do. So even if we continue acting the way we do, and the things we do best, it's not what the business needs at this stage. So our CEO, Tim, is doing an amazing job of making the business function as a business needs to function at this stage, which does, as you say, involves a certain amount more process and, just understanding measurement, target, stuff which we just not had. But retaining what he calls the founder energy, however you want to refer to that. It's as you said, it's the stuff which probably comes in a bit sideways, or might appear a bit random. And he's trying to sort of distill that, and what exactly is it? And there's an element of sort of ownership, and an element of just, if you've got a belief, if you've got something you think is really important, then make sure that the business hears it. Don't just get stuck doing your little bit. It's just it's a tricky one to try and blend in as the business grows, and as it requires stronger foundations, effectively. But that is exactly what we're trying to do at the moment. As Nick and I get older and less useful to the business, so how do you retain the best bits without letting us knock the wheels off by being too random and still behaving like a startup, when actually it now needs to be a lot more focused than it used to. Even the way we do innovation now, it's so much more thought through, because we were creating so many SKUs. As you said, we're still on 60 something. It's not like we've stopped. But but we in the early days, it was very much our testing process was to get it out there in the market and see whether it worked or not. And as a small business, that worked really well, because it was just more effective than any amount of research was ever going to be. But now, at a bigger scale, a launch is a bigger deal, and you don't want to be distracted with loads and loads of launches if hardly any of them are going to work. And also, if you want the brand recognition, we need to make sure everything is right. So it's just being a bit clearer about why why are we launching this, who are we launching it for, what are we expecting from it. So there's still the sort of serendipity in the early stage of our head of innovation does some great brainstorms with what could we launch, and some amazing ideas, and that some of them are not even in food. So it still starts off with the same sort of breadth of opportunity, but fewer of them will get to the point of actual launch than probably would have done. But the reasoning will be stronger.
No, but it's so interesting because I suppose with us, with the deep roast, that was we basically burnt the nuts in Wimbledon Rugby Club kitchen. And then I personally believe, like, you don't know what you don't know. Like, the market didn't know they needed a deep roasted peanut butter. No. Suppose you guys were a granola brand. You launched the milks, and then bang, that was like, that really kind of had the cataclysmic shift in the brand. So I do think it's interesting balance. And that's why I was trying to kind of understand how you keep yours and Nick's magic, like balancing that with the process. And it is the hardest thing. Even if we've grown our team to like 16, 17 now, and there are more processes in it. It's just getting that balancing act. Is there a specific example of, like, in the, I don't know, maybe the last couple of months where you and Nick have had an idea, and I would just love to kind of know how that works on maybe a weekly basis, of like, we need to do this, but it's how to manage that.
So I can't think of a specific example. I think because the idea, I think when we'll know it's working if it's not only coming from me and Nick, because I think that's what has to happen. Is it can't just be us. It has to be that, because we are nobody, we are just other people. Anyone else in the team can have these ideas, and it's just making sure that there is space for that and the attitude for that, and that people. It's sort of not get stuck in a rut, isn't it? It's not letting the process own you. It's you own what you're doing, and then you'll ask the right questions. Then at that, it's that point where you go, but we could be doing that, and it would be so much more interesting or so much more effective. And that's what bring that back. Bring that back, and put that into the business. So if everybody has that sort of sense of they've got the power and the capacity and the ability to see what could be better. And like you said, something's gone a bit wrong. I mean, it's brilliant when it comes out something going a bit wrong. It's exactly what happened to us when we got the wrong oats for the muesli. They were the wrong mill, the wrong grind, and they were just too tough for muesli, and didn't want to waste them. So started making porridge. Turned out they're brilliant for porridge, because you need a bit more bulk for, you need a bit more bite to an oat that makes a porridge. So all of those things, it's when something goes wrong, and sometimes it just goes wrong and you've just got to move on. But when you can turn that, when you can see in that what the opportunity is, that's a huge win. And stuff will always go wrong, and there will be opportunities. So it's just seeing, getting the whole team to feel like they can make those changes, they can make stuff happen, I think.
No, that's so interesting. No, I just think because it's a pain point every founder or people listening to this will be going through. So it's I love that. It's about kind of keeping the magic as you scale. The other question or theme I wanted to explore is export and winning in different kind of countries, because I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but Lou's mentioned that you guys are in a whole bevy of different countries. It's a very kind of intergalactic brand. But
they're all in this galaxy at the moment, I think.
Yeah. Well, you never know, especially if you're really in rude health, kind of the sky's the limit. But export is such an enigma for every brand. Like it seems straightforward, yet it seems paradoxically like so tremendously difficult. If you were to kind of start your export strategy again tomorrow, like what would you do differently, and why? And
it's a good question. What we did with export was really fine. We sort of copied what we did in the UK. So in the UK, we started with sort of premium. So it started in either health food stores or delis, and then gradually grew into mults, fundamentally. And so what we did abroad was slightly replicate that model, and we did that through finding distributors, importers who were in that world. Our first export was Norway, to a distributor who, you know, looked after all the fine food and health food stores in Norway. There aren't a million of them, but they understood what Rude Health stood for, and they could sell it in their market. So I think the biggest, I don't know how I would change that, actually. I think the challenge with exports is that you don't know the consumer. You're not on the ground, so you are relying on the person, whoever you're selling through, to have that knowledge. So that you need somebody who can do the sales and marketing. It's not just a distribution game. You need someone who knows their market, knows their consumer, and knows how to get to them. It worked pretty well. I mean, but not as a huge. We weren't trying to be enormous anywhere. So, you know, the sales going through that approach was a great way of testing markets and getting a sense of what worked. It doesn't necessarily get you huge distribution in any one territory. That, for us, I think happened partly with scale, and I don't know how we would have done that earlier. I mean, I guess I don't know how we'd have done that earlier. I mean, people do it, but we didn't, and I'm not quite sure.
But what I think, sorry.
We got in the end, through being seen in the UK, we got our sort of most straightforward big international market, which is Portugal, interestingly, which would never have been one that we would have put, you know, top of the list as an obvious market for Rude Health. But they were looking for, they'd been looking, and they'd seen Rude Health at the coffee festival. They'd seen, I think, in Amsterdam and London. They'd seen loads of Rude Health in Whole Foods. They'd seen, you know, and they'd done the food tour in London, and they were looking for a couple of flagship healthy brands. So they came to us, and that, you know, that was a big retailer, and that's a fantastic partnership, which is still going. But that came actually through us having scale in the UK, you know, through being seen at various sort of, you know, in stores and then in windows and things, which was interesting because it made me realize, God, you know, it's like everything, you know, once things start succeeding, it feeds its own success.
Sure.
Like getting the first bit's the real killer. It's getting those first listings and the first bits of success.
But what I've learned, and I think it's really interesting, is how you replicated the model irregardless of country. So you still did the built in the indies and health food stores to kind of get that nascent awareness and brand building, so that when you did go into the bigger retailers in X country, there was a bit of oomph behind it. Because we went into Ireland, and it's so annoying. We launched in March 2020. And like it was just a cataclysmic nightmare because I couldn't get over there, and then we had Brexit. So it was just it's how did you get the distributors on board with the brand? Like, did you invite them over? Did you fly over? We
did trade shows, actually, and it was trade shows and getting to know people, and this was a huge part, not just of distributors but suppliers and everybody. It was about relationship. It was, do they get it? Do they get us? Do we get them? Do we like them? And that was what did it. You know, that was what would seal it, was you could feel their energy, enjoyed working with them. You know, they had their market, and it was based, that was what it was based on. Really hugely about relationship, and it still is. You know, supplier relationships and distributor relationships is still enormously important, because I think, because what we want to, you know, we've created a brand that we love and we want people to love, and so you want the people who are either making it or selling it to also have a relationship with it and to have a relationship with you, and to get it. It's not just a thing you're churning through. You know, it's not plastic bits of piping or something. You know, it's something you care about. You're feeding people. So the relationship bit is huge, actually. And again, it could, what you were saying earlier about doing sampling, we still do it ourselves. Our staff, the London Coffee Festival we've just had, people were approaching our staff to try and poach them, and then realizing that they were rude health people, and that was why they were so good. And they're brilliant, you know, they are brilliant. And they were fantastic on stand, and yeah, of course everyone wanted them. But that, as you said, you know, that's lovely, because it's absolutely genuine. You know, they are genuinely talking about the brand. It's not a sales spiel. They love it.
No, it's so true. It's so you can, sometimes you go and meet these like people and you can tell they'd rather just kind of be on Angry Birds or something like that. Like they're just so far removed from actually interested in it. And then you said Portugal was your biggest market, but you built an office in is it Holland?
Yeah, in the Netherlands. Yeah.
How come you guys built an office there versus Portugal, if Portugal's like the bigger?
This was a while ago, so we didn't have Portugal at that point.
Okay.
But what we did find was we found, actually, it was a person. So when we started exporting to the Netherlands, it's still a really good export market for us, and it was one of the really early ones, and it was an early strong one. They have a chain of gourmet healthy stores called Markt, which were and we flew in them right from the beginning. The Netherlands was a market that was working really well, also English speaking basically, so you don't have to do any pack changes, so it's a nice one. Being in Europe at the time, it was an easy one. So it was a great market, and we met somebody through our selling to the Netherlands. We met a Dutch salesperson who we'd have hired in the UK like a shot, but she wasn't interested in coming to the UK. So we took her on in the Netherlands, and she became a kind of one-man business. And then it built up into a smaller group, and she runs our international. So she runs the international from the Netherlands. We've got some staff in London, some staff in the Netherlands, and then worked in our favor when it came to Brexit, because we now have a hub in the Netherlands, like separate business, so we can get around. I mean, we don't want to get into this, but it gets around the rule of origin and all the other joyful difficulties of import and export now.
Yeah, the big palaver. No, but I love that. It kind of goes back to your whole serendipity over strategy, because you know, I love, and people. It's just like, you know, the person who's in the Netherlands. I love that, and I think for listeners, it's just so reassuring to see a brand like of your kind of stature and size that, you know, you still do the sampling yourself. You have never lost that kind of human bit and the grit, I suppose. Cool. Conscious of your time, so like kind of few more questions, Camilla. And where I want to go to now is sort of resilience and navigating uncertainty, because I know everyone listening to this, like one of the certains of starting a business is uncertainty, right? So it's basically the only certainty is uncertainty, and it can be quite like discombobulating when you're going through all these like crazy changes, etc. And one of the things I read, it was an Ask Queeth article. It says, what is the most important thing that you've learned from starting a business? And he said the ability to learn and to keep going in the face of failure is at least as important. So at least important as any skill or aptitude you bring. What has been the hardest sort of sleepless nights moment on the Rude Health journey? And what were you saying to yourself in that moment to kind of push yourself through it? Because I think everyone listening to this will be going through that on some scale.
Yeah, having been going now, we've been going 16 and a half years, so there's been more than one, and some of them were very long moments. So the whole of 2009, after when the crash happened and stayed, the whole of 2009, and I mean it was a bit longer than that really, we were absolutely on the edge of survival, and we had remortgaged our house, and there were both of us in the business, so it was pretty much, you know, we needed the business to survive, and every time the phone rang you were really crossing your fingers that it wasn't a D-list, because we could not have afforded a D-list. So the only way, how do we get through that? There being two of us, for me, made all the difference. I don't think I would have got through it on my own. I think having two of us was you know, share the pain. I mean, ironically, it actually factually, objectively made it worse, because it was our shared house. You know, it would have been both of us. You know, if your partner was doing something else, you'd actually be more secure. But the fact we were in it together made it slightly easier. And then I think it's day by day. What can you do? I mean, it goes back to that very almost trite thing, you know, focus on the problems you can solve, or the things you can change. And there's an awful lot you can't do anything about, but you can try and do that teeny weeny thing, you know, whether it's get a bit more publicity, you know, to try and shift the sales a bit more, or, you know, improve your pack a bit, or what, it's just focus on the stuff you can do and just keep trying to do that. Get another list, or whatever, anything. And I mean, we would try anything, absolutely anything. And we were, you know, looking at any possible savings, spending absolutely no money, you know, just using whatever we had to do, whatever we could do, and just doing day by day by day by day. I mean, you know, we did it. And if you look around, there's a reason there's not many businesses of our age, is that so many people, but through no fault of their own, and there is a massive element of luck in it as well. We survived, but so few startups who started, you know, anywhere between sort of 2006 and 2011. I mean, almost no one. You know, the cull was extraordinary. You know, I can think of 6 cereal companies that all disappeared. And then in 2012, 13, people started again, and it was suddenly you're like, oh wow, this is great. There's new businesses happening. So that was a really long, really hard period, which was just deal with it day by day. We've made some bad people decisions, and that's a really tough one, because that actually affects morale, and can be quite tricky to sort out, because once you've got something, once something's off, you know, once the morale is off, it's like, how do you get back what's no longer there?
How did you do that? Because I know there's so many.
Took quite a lot of time, actually, quite a lot of time, because you've got to reshape the team, which is never fun. You know, to make sure that you've got the right people, and then it just takes time, because you've got to reassure people that you do, you know, I think when it goes wrong is when there's a dissonance between what it is you want to do and what's actually happening. And to try and so of course to the team that can feel like you don't mean what you say, whereas what's actually happened is you've made a bad decision, and something's not working the way you want it to work. But to them it means like what you're saying is not what's going on in the world. So, you know, even when you've got to you know, get that faith back again. You've got to rebuild the trust that you really do believe it, that is really what you want, and you've just screwed up. But again, you can't even be hugely clear about that, because quite often it's not that there's a bad person, or even someone who's bad at what they're doing. They're probably just in the wrong place. You know, this wasn't the right company for them, you know, and we've made the decision to hire them, so it's actually our fault. I find that one of the hardest things, because I don't know, I just feel hugely responsible every time we make a decision that turns out to be, you know, wrong. Without it, yeah, it's tough. I hate it.
Yeah,
and
to be honest, we had this. I've seen like sort of 2 teams at Money Life. The first was when I was right there at the beginning, and then to be honest, it really started to kick in and change when Lou joined us, because that's when we started to realize, okay, we're trying to hire the right people who have almost the same, very similar values, like same passions. But I can understand how not bad hires. They're not bad hires. It's just the wrong hire. It's like the wrong person, the wrong place. Yeah. So with the like sort of the OG Rude Healthers who have been with you, I think like Bertel and Jonathan, like how did you sort of not rebuild the trust with them, but like get these processes to almost like, because as you were saying, I think it's so hard as a founder. It's like you're not making a decision like it for a bad reason. Like you want it to work, but it's just that dissonance between what you think's in your head and what's actually happening on the ground. Like, how did you rebuild that trust?
I think time, you know, time, and just going back to, you know, making sure that you are then, you know, what you say is happening, what you say you want is what's actually happening. And when that is consistent, when that is happening, then I think, you know, that obviously people can then trust. And it's something that Tim, our new CEO, is really strong on, really strong at being incredibly clear and transparent about what he's trying to do, what he believes in, what the expectations are. He's much better than we ever were at doing it consistently and explicitly, and knowing what it is that people need to hear and need to see. So I think actually, you know, I think we're in a good place now.
Yeah, amazing.
People really know where they stand, and the part of the tricky bit is probably the growth switch between when you're a very small business and each person kind of manages their own little world, you know, and there isn't really a meeting because you're all sitting around one big desk, and you know, you just talk about stuff and decisions get made, and so everybody is totally responsible for what they do, and in a way you're all like mini businesses, and you've got, you know, one salesperson, one finance person, one marketing, you know, it's really straightforward. And so the communication then happens incredibly naturally. And I think we found there was quite a tricky bit where we were assuming that everybody would always continue to act like that you it would always be like your mini business and you take responsibility, and if you had an issue, just turn around and ask someone, because that was how it started off. And it doesn't, you know, at some stage there's more of a sense of hierarchy, or people are worried about raising things, or, you know, and you've then got to start bringing in the ways to make it easy for people to do what they need to do, which is again where Nick and I probably aren't the best people to be doing that, because we don't really know how you do it, and that's where, you know, Tim is bringing in the stuff that hopefully makes it really, people get their input, know how to have their input, and, you know, can be heard. I hope that's the idea.
No, sorry, I was just reflecting because I interviewed the mindful chef, Miles from Mindful Chef, the other week, and he was saying something similar. As they've brought an MD in called Tim as well, actually. And what they do is the founders add their magic. Like they have a thing called like the Feast of Failure or something like that, and they get all the new employees in, because they want to, obviously you've got to have this process, but like almost too much rigmarole means people don't want to say what they're actually feeling. So I think it's a really interesting way of like almost from ancillary coming in from the sides to like add that founder's magic. And I think it's really interesting. So just out of sheer curiosity here is, obviously you would have had a long list of people wanting to join or be the MD of Rude Health. So what were the things that other than like Tim's sort of CV, which I'm assuming was like very glittery, what were you looking for in him that made him the right fit? Because again, I think that's a really interesting thing for the listeners who are trying to find maybe someone who's got more experience.
So I mean, actually relatively similar for all hires now. We used to hire on basically on fit, almost entirely, and then we switched to a while to skills, and then we realized that skills alone just doesn't work. Totally doesn't work. Fit is absolutely crucial, but obviously now there is a skills. It's trying to get both. It's a big ask. I mean, you know,
it's a very big ask.
Skills, it's a big ask. You know, that's hard, and we needed to, for this role specifically, we wanted somebody who had new challenger brand, absolutely crucial, basically absolutely crucial, because I think the mindset, I think this is, for me, is one of the big things, is there is a totally different mindset running, being part of building a challenger brand from being in an established brand. It's just totally different. The whole way of doing things is different, and that was what I think that was a non-negotiable. And to have built it, we wanted someone who'd grown well beyond the stage that we're at, you know, who can do business. So those were the sort of obvious skills, you know, experience in challenger brand and have built it. And then we knew we wanted someone who was really strong on people, because that we are people. I mean, Rude Health is so people based, you know, everything about what we do, you know, the fact that our team, you know, are on, and it wasn't just the sales team on the London Coffee Festival stand, you know, there were people from marketing, people from operations, you know, everyone had a had their moment. And it's the same. Last year we did an event down at a Lido in Penzance, and had a sales blitz sort of around the country. And again, you know, it wasn't just one team that got involved, it's the whole team. And it, you know, everybody needs to really believe in it and really care about it and want to get involved in it. And then you get, you know, and then you do these events and you kind of realize why you're doing it, you know, you love it. So it needed to be somebody who really gets that, and the you know, the supplier relationship is huge. You know, you want to be able to work with them, because we don't own our own factories, we work with suppliers, and you've got to have a great relationship with them. If you want to get something out of them that they're not currently doing, which we usually do, then you know, that's going to be relationship based, because it's going to be a pain in the ass to get to the point where, you know, and a lot of iterations to get to a food that we're really happy with, that they can make. So yeah, that was the big one. And then there's just that intangible, does it feel right?
The
Does
gut.
it feel right?
Everything I do is a gut decision. I mean, I interviewed the Fox Park founder actually, and he was sort of saying that, you know, shoppers don't go around with an Excel spreadsheet, so just like, let's start making decisions with your gut. And I thought that's such a great piece of wisdom. Cool. Where I want to finish, Camilla, is actually like food, and what kind of zooming out of from sort of on a micro level of Rude Health, like what does food actually mean to you?
Okay, there's a thing I always bang on about here, which I ought to be more specific about it, but I read an article a few years ago which said that the second biggest indicator for poor mental health is how many meals you eat alone, which I thought was really interesting. And that for me says a huge amount about food, and actually it obviously does link back to Rude Health, but it's this idea that it's not just nutrients. Food is not just about how many calories, how many nutrients, how many macros, or whatever you've got into yourself. It's much bigger than that. You know, eating with other people, enjoying food, sharing food is, and as again, it comes back to this survival thing. Yes, you need it to survive, but if you think about every single social occasion, every single life-marking event, it almost always, you know, a wedding, there's a wedding breakfast, you know, everything you do, there's a meal, there's shared food. And in some countries, I think I'm right in saying in China that, you know, how are you is, have you eaten rice today? You know, it's and in so many countries, you know, the first thing you do for a stranger is offer them food. You know, it's absolutely a social human need, and that's sort of where I'm coming at it from, and that's the Rude Health element of it. Is it's together, you know, it unites people, it joins, but it's you have to do it, but it's also the ultimate sort of human social experience. It's both, and you need that. That's part of it. It's as necessary as what nutrients are in it, which is again why Rude Health, despite being a healthy based brand, is not focused at all on you know, nutrients and fuel, because that's so much just a part of the story. And we'll cover that. We're doing that in the recipes. That's our problem. We'll make sure we're delivering you really good food, really nourishing food, but your job as a consumer is to enjoy it and appreciate it with, you know, with other people.
No, I mean, I can like wholeheartedly agree on that. And I listened to a podcast, and you were saying that you'd like, one of your ways to unwind, I suppose, is to cook and have a dance around in the kitchen, which, and I'll probably I'm putting my neck on the line here, but during lockdown, I was living with my parents, and I did this. It was a bit of a joke on the virtual office thing called Poga, like Pope Yoga. So I'd go and listen to, like, it was a bit of a paradox, like techno dancing and doing some yoga, and it was like the most amazing, like it was like the best thing in the world.
Brilliant.
And I would love to know, like, what are some of your favorite, like, well, what is your sort of favorite songs to cook to, and what's your favorite dish to cook? Because I think people listening to this, like, if they are going through a challenge right now, like sometimes it is as easy as just shutting everything down, whacking some tunes on and making a banging meal. Like, I would love to know what the Camilla Barnard playlist
Banging,
and
banging tune playlist is depending on mood, but if I'm in a real kind of banging tune mood, it would be something like I Can Tina Turner's River Deep Mountain High, and actually quite a lot of the girl groups from the 60s is my kind of banging tune, and then some ska. Almost any ska. That would be my banging tune landscape. I think, but you're not. Sometimes it may be a more chill, more melancholy thing. And what would I make? I mean, do it almost doesn't matter. I mean, one of my desert island dishes is probably potato dauphinoise.
Oh God.
Just I don't know, it's just pure comfort, really, isn't it? I could just eat that on its own with a bit of salad.
It's like a big hug from your grandma.
It totally is.
It's so nice.
Amazing. Like, I love potatoes.
Potatoes. Yeah, no, I'm literally the whole, me and carbs are best mates. We're inseparable. Camilla, that was amazing. I really love that conversation. I think the kind of key things for me is just this thing about always asking why. We'll stand listeners in such good stead for everything they're doing, because I think we can get so perplexed with thinking, oh, we've got to do it this way, this is how people have done it before, we've got to do it the more sort of corporate way or whatever. And I think always asking this question why, that serendipity over strategy, is just brilliant. And so thank you so much.
Oh, you're really welcome. I hope it's useful as well as entertaining, with any luck. But it's been absolute pleasure. Joy to talk to you. Really interesting to go back and look at kind of time in Japan and influence and stuff like that.
Amazing. Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you.